All right, you read or
Um,
talk.
so I think we are in chapter 25, verse 39.
Yes. Just started to look at that. If your brother becomes impoverished with you, sold, and he sells someone their own brother.
Right, so this might be an early form of like welfare. In other words, there are different options for a community. Let's say somebody is poor in a city. If they're poor in a city, the city most likely has institutions that are in place to deal with the poor. So like a soup kitchen, and there might be another place where the person could
Right.
get clothing, and another place where a person might find shelter. They would all be provided by
The
the city, by the community.
but not
That's
like-
if you live in a city.
Right,
But what if you don't live in a city? What if you live in a rural area? You're rural poor. That's a different kind of poor, rural poor, than urban poor. So imagine if you're rural poor, there aren't necessarily institutions set up to make sure you have food during the day,
right,
or to make sure that you have shelter or clothing. So what are you supposed to do? So hopefully you would communicate with wherever the local jurisdiction is, and then they would take care of you. But there is another option. And the other option is you sort of hire yourself out. Now, there's different ways of hiring yourself out. You can hire yourself out as a ranch hand, as in many Western movies
Mhm.
that we see. And there's an assumption that they will feed and shelter you and pay you while you're doing that work. And that could happen to be a farmhand or to work in somebody's
Right.
fields when there's work in the fields. That might be something that you can do.
To earn your keep.
Right, but even if you could do that when there's work in the fields, that doesn't happen year round.
Right.
So there may be many circumstances where the person is just not able to feed themselves or their family. So there's an option in the Torah, which is indentured servitude. This is for a Jewish person, and the Jewish person sells themselves, as it were, into indentured servitude. Exactly what the deal was, it might be that the guy just agrees to give you food and shelter and protection, and in return, you have to do the work of an indentured servant. That
Right.
might be one option. It could be even money is exchanged, because another option for why this guy gets sold is, in this case, it does seem like he's poor, but in other cases, it might be because he stole, and now he's being sold in order to make up what he stole. Now, he could be sold to the person he stole from, but it also could be that he's sold to somebody else, and that the agreement is that whoever he's sold to will pay what was his debt. So that's another option. I don't know if this case that we're reading now is also about somebody who owed money and can't pay it back. I doubt that, only because Shemitah was supposed to
Yes.
take care of that case, where if somebody owed money and couldn't pay him back, that Shemitah would take care of the loan, then he wouldn't have to sell himself.
Right,
But I don't know, maybe this guy has debts and wants to pay them back. So it's possible that money is actually paid up front,
Yeah.
And then maybe he uses that money to help support his family, or maybe he uses that money to pay back debts. But the end result is that he is an indentured servant. He is not owned physically by the person who engages in this deal, but his work is owned. In other words, this guy owns all his work. So for instance, if during this time, this man would come up with an invention, most likely the invention would be owned by the person for whom he is working. He owns the product of this guy's hands.
Right.
So I think it would even apply to something like that, like if he patented something while he's working for him, the patent
At
would
that
go to the
point,
guy.
If that would be more than,
Buy himself out.
yeah, to
Right,
be enough to buy himself out
right,
and split it, like, here's
Right.
what I owe you, I'm taking the rest. and
right.
taking
That
my
could be what he
invention
might
and
have
going.
done. It could be. But like I know that there are business arrangements where you don't own the product of your work. This is not even selling yourself into
Yeah.
indentured servitude. This is just a condition of your contract or
Yeah.
whatever. So let's say you wrote books. You were working for some company and you wrote, and they're an encyclopedia company or something like that. So you wrote a lot of the entries in their encyclopedia. I think they own the copyright to all that material, or the person who came up with the Big Mac.
Right,
I seem to remember they were just an employee of McDonald's, and that they don't get super compensation
Right.
for the invention.
but if his boss was nice, he got a decent bonus there.
Right. Yes, yeah. But so that's in a regular contract. I'm assuming it's something like that even in with indentured servitude. But you're right. There is, if somebody is thinking about it, and there is some opportunity that presents itself, he may make a deal like that with the person who bought his service. Okay, so if he becomes poor while he's with you, and he's sold to you, you can't work him like a Gentile slave. Kisachir, he's like a salaried employee. Ketoshavia imach, and like a citizen, he shall be with you. Ad shnat hayovel ya'avod imach. He works until the Jubilee for you. Now, we saw earlier when this was first brought up in Mishpatim, in Exodus, that this is not, there's some other steps here. Let's just go back for a second to that part of Exodus, because there's a step. This is just a brief
I'll get my coffee.
Okay. So this is at the beginning of Mishpatim. So this is right after the 10 Commandments, the 10 statements,
Right,
and then a discussion about the Mizbeach, about the altar. So it's in chapter 21. The Eila HaMishpatim, and these are the laws Asher Tasim Lifnehem, that you shall place before them. This is God speaking of Moshe. And then here come the laws. Kisikneh Eved Ivri, if you acquire a Hebrew slave, Sheish Shanim Ya'avod, he shall work 6 years. Ubashviz Yetzei L'Chadshim Chinam, and in the 7th year he goes free. That step is not part of our discussion right here. Our discussion goes right to the Jubilee.
yes,
But this step 1 is that the initial, and this is the maximum that somebody can be acquired without their agreement. So this would even include somebody who was sold into slavery as a thief. The most he can be sold for is 6 years, and then he would go free in the 7th year. Now, if he's selling himself, obviously he agrees to the sale, but even so, the standard sale is 6 years and then goes free in the 7th. Now, it's not really 6 years because it depends on the Shemitah cycle.
Yeah.
So depending where in the Shemitah cycle this person is sold will determine how long that is. So for instance, if it's right, let's say this person would be sold next month. So then he'd get a full 6 years of servitude and he'd go out in the next Shemitah, because Shemitah is just about to end at Rosh Hashanah. So then he'd go out at the next Shemitah. So so if he came in single, he goes out single. If he came in married, then his wife goes with him. Im adonav yitain lo isha, if his master gives him a wife. Now, this wife is not Jewish. This clause is talking about a unique option, which is that even though he's Jewish, he is allowed to have a Gentile family during the period of servitude. So again, let's say
He leaves them though. Does he leave them when he goes?
because he does
they
not,
stay?
because they are actually owned by the master. And just as a, it's important to just remember that nowadays we don't think slavery
Right.
is an option. We don't believe it would be the moral thing to do nowadays. In those days, times were different. But nowadays, no rabbinic authority would think that it's proper to have slaves nowadays. That doesn't mean the Torah, it's not questioning the Torah, it's just that the Torah was talking for those
Null
days.
and
not
void.
nowadays. Right, so there has to be a disclaimer that nowadays we would not have slavery. In the language of Rabbi Soloveitchik, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. We're not going back to
Right.
slavery. But in a time when they had it, this woman, is a slave, which means that she is in perpetuity a slave to her master.
Right.
But this is a kind of perk, maybe an incentive for the master to purchase a Jewish slave or the contract for a Jewish slave, because he can use him for his gene pool. You know, if he feels that would be beneficial.
But at
So-
that time, couldn't the master himself have more than one wife?
He could, but like, let's say there's let's say there's a person available who he thinks would add qualities to his gene pool that he himself would not be able to add. So, yeah, and also, by the way, a master is not halachically permitted to be intimate with a Gentile slave. The only situation in which a Jewish male is permitted to be intimate with a non-Jewish woman is this, where he is an indentured Jewish servant and she is a slave, a Gentile slave. In such a case, it is permitted. That's the only case. So for the master, he would not be permitted.
Right.
So therefore, even if he thought he could add something significant to the gene pool of his slaves, he would
Rabbi,
not be allowed.
could,
Yeah.
David and I are driving in the car, so we're mostly on mute. But if he came with a Jewish wife, then he just,
No.
it is,
If
wait, what are you asking?
Is he allowed to marry, is the Jewish indentured servant, is he allowed to marry a Jewish woman?
You mean even if his master doesn't want him to?
Well, can he give him a Jewish wife?
He can
Well,
come with one.
He can, but if he has a Jewish wife, that's, the master has no control over a Jewish woman. The master doesn't
Okay,
have ownership of the Jewish woman. The master wouldn't have ownership of their children. If he wants to get a Jewish wife just out of the kindness of his heart, I mean, he just wants to help him have a shidduch, then, I mean, he could, but that would be just like anybody else arranging a shidduch. There would be no ownership interest.
but what if he did it on his own hook?
What?
What if he did it on his own hook?
Yeah,
You
so
know,
I assume, because he's 100% a Jewish citizen. So I'm assuming that he's allowed to make that decision on his own. I'm not, the only thing that makes me hesitate is that it could impact his work arrangement with his master. Like so that's the only thing I'm not sure about. Certainly, for instance, he has to keep all 613 mitzvahs, and one of the 613 mitzvahs is to be fruitful and multiply. So, and according to Rabbeinu Asher, getting married is the hechsher mitzvah. It's the preparation for being fruitful and multiply. So getting married is the necessary step for a man to be fruitful and multiply. And since a man is supposed to be fruitful and multiply, and he's not supposed to delay it unnecessarily, so it's certainly in his interest to get married as soon as possible. Whether that itself amounts to, that's what I'm not sure of. Does it amount to a breach of contract with him and his master? Because the master is acquiring his service for a limited amount of time. And if this guy makes decisions that are now going to make him less available, so that's the only question I have. Is that something he needs the master's permission for? On the one hand, he has an obligation to get married, and if the master is not allowed to get in between him and obligations of the Torah.
Right.
On the other hand, should he decide to get married, there certainly is he's going to be less available to do work. And I know that there is certain work where it is very hard to be married and do that work. Like according to the first season of The West Wing, it's very hard to be the chief of staff of the President of the United States and to be able to spend the kind of quality time a wife should expect from a husband.
Especially in the first year.
Yes, so
Going back to David's question, what happens if he marries a woman who could buy him out of his slave ship?
right, there is an issue as to how that happens. I mean, even here, it's discussed with, here, let's see if it's discussed here. The buying them out. All right, anyway, so here, the first reason we went here is because this is a missing piece in our discussion in Bahar. This whole business of this working 6 years and then resting on the 7th year. I mean, not resting, going free on the 7th year. And it says, Yotzei lechavshi hinam, he goes out free. In other words, there's no money. He doesn't owe any more money, doesn't owe any money. Im bekapo yavo bekapo yitzei, if he came in single, he goes out single. Im bal isha hu yatze ishto imo, if he was married, he goes out married. Im adonav yitain lo isha, and then if his master gives him a wife, this is talking about from a Gentile slave, v'yolda lo banim o banos, and she gives birth to sons or daughters, ha'isha v'yiladeha tiyeh la'adoneha. The woman and her children belong to the master. V'hu yitzei bekapo, and he goes out single. Okay, and that's talking about that special arrangement with a Gentile slave. Ve'im amor ye'omer ha'eved, and if the servant will say, Ahavti es Adoni, I love my master, es ishti ves banai, my wife and my sons, my children, lo eitzei chavshi, I don't want to go free. Then v'yigisho Adonav el ha'Elohim, his master brings him to Elohim. Now, in this case, the word Elohim means judges. This is one of those places where the word Elohim means judge. This is, again, there's another place which says, do not curse Elohim, which is interpreted to mean judges over there. Sometimes Elohim can mean judges. Sometimes it can mean rulers. B'nai Elohim is translated that way. The sons of the rulers in the end of Genesis. Now the book of Bereshit, the Parsha of Bereshit, where it talks about the sons of the rulers and the sons and the daughters of man. So there it has the word Elohim. So Elohim can be like with a small e or a capital E. It can be either referring to people in positions of power or God. It can also be referring to idols. Vihigisho el hadeles, and you bring him to the door, o el mezuzah, or the doorpost. Ve'ratza adonav esasno v'martzea, and his ear is pierced. Va'avado le'olam, and he serves him forever. Now there, this in the commentaries they suggest it's not truly forever. That's where you need our Torah portion, which says until the Jubilee, until Yovel. But then at Yovel, it seems like he would go out. So Rashi even quotes our verse over there. So now, in the second one is where it talks about yeah, so here it says, in the next one, we're talking about a Jewish maidservant. This is a completely different set of laws. A Jewish girl is sold by her father or her mother or brother into indentured servitude. This happens when she's a girl, a little girl.
Right.
And then so what's supposed to happen is that she's supposed to marry either the master or the son of the master. That is supposed to be the deal. So let's say she gets sold at like 8 years old. So she would work for a few years around the house as a indentured servant. And then she would either be married to the son of the master or the master himself. And if a man sell his daughter to be a Jewish maidservant, she does not go out like slaves. And that means that there are certain circumstances where a Gentile slave would go free. She doesn't go free under those circumstances, like if they knock a tooth out.
Yeah.
A Gentile slave goes free. She doesn't go free under those circumstances. Im ra'a be'enei adoneha asher lo ya'ada behefta. Let's say he finds something wrong, because apparently originally this was supposed to be for marriage. He found something wrong, something bad, and he decides that he is not going to marry her, or his son marry her, the hefta. He has to let her be redeemed. Now, this means if it's earlier, then he gets paid what's ever left, and then she goes free. Or la'am nachri lo yimshol l'machra be'vigdoba. So he can't sell her to anybody else. Is this, in some ways, this is considered his fault, this whole thing. And therefore he can't sell her to anybody else. V'im livno yardena, or, there's another option. He could marry her off to his son, Kimishpata Banos Yasela, and then she has to be treated like every other daughter-in-law. Im acheres yikach, and if he takes a different wife along with this woman, he has to take care of her basic needs. By the way, this terminology is also a reference to all husbands. This is part of the ketubah, the bundle of laws that are connected to the ketubah, that the obligations of a husband to a wife, the obligations of a wife to a husband. V'im shalosh eila lo yasela. So if she wasn't redeemed by somebody else, he didn't marry her, or his son didn't marry her, then the yatzachina mein kesef, she goes out free
Can
without
he
any
offer
money.
her to a Jewish slave?
No.
Okay.
Now, there was this one clause here, which is he has to allow her to be redeemed. So let's say it's earlier in her servitude, and he's already made the decision he's not going to marry her, and his son's not going to marry her. He has to allow her to be redeemed. That makes it sound like she can't be redeemed against the master's will. In other words, in the case of the Jewish maidservant, the part of the deal is that either he or his son is going to marry her. And if they still want to do that, but the father suddenly comes into money, he may not be able to buy her out of this deal.
Yeah.
I mean, unless the guy changes his mind and says, I'll take the money.
Yeah.
But so, because it sounds like if he decides not to marry her, then he has to make her available to be redeemed.
Right.
But let's say somebody just, the father changes his mind a year later and he has money, he may not be able to force the guy to do it. Once they've entered this arrangement, as long as this guy's going to marry her or his son's going to marry her, it could be it's too late. Now so the question is, what about a Jewish servant, an Eved Ivri? So that's the question. Can he buy himself out, or can somebody else buy himself out without the consent of the person who bought him? In other words, like somebody could say, I bought his work for the next certain amount of years. Somebody else says, I want to free him. I have the money. Maybe he can't do that. Once they've entered the arrangement, maybe he has to go through the arrangement unless the master himself decides. So I know this is discussed somewhere in the Gemara. I don't remember where, and I don't remember what the conclusion is. Okay. Right, so let us go back to Bahar. So we again are in chapter 25. And so in ours, it says that he is to be treated as somebody who you've hired, not
Like a
as
slave.
not a slave. He should be like a citizen, ketoshav, he should be like a citizen with you. And then it says he is yours until Yovel. So again, it missed that in part. V'yatsa me'imach hu ubanav imo. Vishav el mishpachto ve'el echuzat avotav yashuv. So at the Jubilee year, he is going to go free. He's going to return to his family, to his original inheritance. So, because he is apparently going to have land to return to because it's the Yovel,
Right.
and he probably, what happened to him was he sold the land first, and then
He sold
he
himself.
sold himself. So
Right.
now both the land is
Returned
freed
to him.
and he is free. Ki avodai hein, they are my servants. Asher hotzei osam eretz Mitzrayim, who I took out of the land of Egypt. Lo yimachru mimkeres eved, they cannot be sold as slaves. Now this is part of the result of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Part of the result of the exodus from Egypt is that we are God's servants now. We cannot be sold like slaves anymore. It's not possible to sell us
Right.
like slaves. Lo sirda do beforech, and because of that, you cannot oppress him like you would a slave. Like with a slave, you
No
can
hard labor, no.
right, you can sort of force him to do hard labor. And that word sirda makes it sound almost like whipping or that word lo sirda, lashon ridui negisha. So that language. What do you have as the translation over there?
Which line?
So it was lo in verse 43, the first words, lo tirda bo before.
You shall not subjugate him. Though a Jew who sells himself as a slave deserves to be subjugated to the indignities of having a master, nevertheless he remains a servant of God and cannot sell himself completely. Therefore, the verse limits the owner's dominion. It's Sforno's interpretation. Do not seek to break the Jewish slave's body and spirit by
So they
ordering-
mentioned body. Right?
Yes,
They
says
mentioned
body,
body.
Jewish slave's body and spirit, by ordering him to perform difficult tasks that have no useful purpose, such as ordering him to boil water when there is no need for it, or tasks whose duration is ill-defined, such as ordering him to keep digging around the tree until I come back. The Rambam elaborates that this is forbidden to have him work merely to keep him busy.
Right. So that also Rashi says that. Right. That's the beforech part. Avodas ferach. That's how they describe the work in Egypt. That kind of breaking work that breaks your spirit. But that word redo, because that word is used in the blessing to humans in the first creation chapter. So it says, "Pru urvu, be fruitful or multiply. Pru urvu, umilo es haaretz, fill the earth, v'kiv shuha, and conquer it. Uredu b'dgasaya," and so that word redo, this same word here. So over there, it means, it's usually translated as to prod or to manage. Uredu b'dgasaya, manage the fish of the sea, ba'of hashamayim, the birds of the heavens, and the animals on the land. So there it's talking, it uses that word redo, it means like to prod or to manage. But here it sounds like it's something more
Also physical though. The physical kind of What do they want? Not necessarily a whip, but, you know, prodding him
Prod.
to do
Right,
more than he has to.
Right.
You're prodding him mentally.
right, because the
rather
word
than physically.
beforech, that's the word that they're talking about. Lo sirda bo beforech, do not like prod him in a way that breaks his spirit, and you shall fear God. Va'avdecha asher yilecha, but it distinguishes between the Jewish servant and the Gentile.
Yes.
It is not prohibiting you to do this to Gentiles. It's only prohibiting you to do this to Jews. That does seem to be a distinction, right? That
Yeah.
seems to be in the context here. That this is not forbidden to do to Gentiles, to Gentile slaves.
Yeah.
Va'avdecha ba'amosecha asher yilecha me'es hagoyim, but your slaves and maidservants that you have from the Gentiles, asher shvosehem mehem tiknu eved ba'amah, if you bought slaves or maidservants from them, the gam mipnei toshavim hagarim imachem, mehem tiknu mishpavosehem asher imachem asher holidu ba'artzachem va'yu lachem la'akuzah. So either if you bought them from the nations around you, or even if you bought them from Gentiles who live amongst you,
Right.
and you acquired them, and then they've given birth to more in your land, then you own them like property.
Right.
Visnachaltam osam lifnechem, and then you can pass them
Pass them
on
on
in
to your-
inheritance to your sons, achrechem, afterwards, lareshes achuzah, as a kind of to inherit it, la'olam, forever, la'olam bahem ta'avodu, they will always serve you, uba'achechem b'nei Yisrael ish ba'achiv, and your brothers, the people of Israel, lo sirda bo b'forech. In other words, your Jewish brothers, again, it says, again, that you cannot manage them or prod them in a way that breaks their spirit. But again, it's like bookmarking, it's bookending it. It said that in the beginning, it said that at the end. And in between, it talks about the Gentile slave. Again, it seems to be
Make it
distinguishing,
biased.
right? It looks almost like this should be available for a chiasm, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good Shabbos. We're here. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Good
I'll
luck.
talk to you, Liz. Thank you.
It does look like there could be a chiasm here. It says lo sirda. So look at verse 43.
Mhm. Shall not subjugate him through hard labor, and then you go all the way back down to.
Right, so you have 43 at the top, and you have 46 at the bottom.
Right,
At the second half of 46, the second half
Yeah.
of 46. So now let's look at 44. Your servants from the Gentiles, if you have them from the Gentiles,
well, kind of,
it's almost,
If you
it's
go-
very almost.
yeah.
So,
You
Asher
should
Chamez
know-
Adon Asher Tzimei Timku Eva Ba'ama. The question is,
If you go to
This is-
46,
that
then
first
you're
part,
holding them for your children. They become part of your,
I don't know, it takes some work to make that a chiasm, but
Yeah, it does.
it's tantalizing, you
Yeah.
want it to be. Again, this issue of Gentile slaves, it's a matter that has been
done on
discussed, well, but it's also been discussed for the last, let's say, 160 years or so. You see it discussed in relatively contemporary Jewish scholarship. Like, what is it? What was the, is that me?
Mine's off.
Yeah, so it might, but I think next time, I don't know if I'm meeting, I don't think we're meeting next week. Though, 'cause
Are
I
you in
think I'm not
Denver
gonna
with
be there
Dad?
in Door County.
Oh,
Yeah.
Denver.
So
Dave might be
I'll
here
know,
with Dave.
I'll know. I think we're coming back on Thursday, so I don't think we'll meet on Thursday, so that'll be
Okay.
next week. But maybe we'll talk about how to understand slavery in the Torah a little bit.
Sure.
Might take this.
My
as a
cats
show.
treat me as a slave.
Yeah, but you went into that.
Yeah, I went into that voluntarily.
Shaul HaMelech,
Yeah, but you know what?
we just finished